Hello, and welcome to the Building an Indie Business podcast with SupremeRumHam. I'm your host, Alex. Today, I wanted to discuss growing a community and how I've learned to grow the open podcast community and the 5 ways I have been growing the open podcast community with Twitter, writing, creating interacting with the people on the platform, and providing value to the members of the community. But first, I wanted to give a shout out to Fajar Sedek. He is the co-founder of the open podcast community. It was actually his idea originally. He came up with the name Open Podcast, and he had the idea to create a Telegram chat as an MVP. You can hire him as Fajar as a service. Move Over functions as a service. FAAS now stands for Fajar as a service. You can hire Fajar for logo design, branding, video promotion branding, and poster design branding. Alright, I will link to all his stuff in the show notes. Let's get into the podcast. Okay, so how I use Twitter to grow the community is I follow everyone who I believe has an interest in open podcast. So I have my Twitter list that we discussed in a previous episode, and for the open podcast Twitter account, I have followed everyone on that list, and some of them have followed me back. The second way I use Twitter is every person who has a new episode in the community, I tweet about it, and I tweet with a little extra stuff about podcasting. So I use some podcasting hashtags to help that person get more visibility on Twitter. Okay, so the next thing I do is I write about podcasting. I have a couple articles about the podcast industry, and I plan to write more. So right now, I have a article about the podcast market. That was even before I started Open Podcasts, or before I even started the directory. I have articles comparing podcasting to writing and creating videos on YouTube. And I have how to start a podcast. And in some of these articles, I mention open podcasts. So recently, my how to start a podcast article was featured in Hacker Noon, and on the end of the article, I mention join communities to get ideas and other things, and I specifically link to the open podcast community. And what happened was that a couple people joined the community because they saw the article. At least one person joined because they saw the article. Okay. So the next thing I do is I interact with people on different platforms in a way that will bring them to my platform. So I am very active on Reddit. I will answer questions that people have about podcasting that I know. I don't overstep my boundaries, but I will answer questions that I have a good answer to. So recently, someone on Reddit wanted to start a stock market podcast, and I just simply mentioned, don't give advice, actual investment advice, because they might be able to come back and sue you if the investment goes wrong. simple things like that. Or someone asked about like how to do an intro or add music, and I mentioned Audacity. Another platform I go to is Indie Hackers, and I just answer questions that people have about podcasting. Same exact thing I do on Reddit. And sometimes I will bring up open podcasts, or I make sure specifically on Indie Hackers to have a link to the open podcast community in my profile. So someone recently joined the community, and they said that they found the community on on Indie Hackers because I have a link to the Telegram chat on my Indie Hackers profile. Okay, so the next thing I do is I create interactions. And this is so that people who are looking at the community to join it, they don't see a inactive community and think that no one else is on the platform or in the chat. And the way I do this is I post links to articles that I see. I ask questions, give people opportunities to talk. Anyone who joins the community, I ask them 2 questions. I ask them how they found the community and if they have a podcast. And if they say, no, I don't have a podcast, I will link them to my articles, and then they will read it and maybe have a podcast, and that'll create more information that I can share with them, and then I could take their podcast and then share it on the Twitter account and see I have a cycle going. Okay. So the final thing that I do is I provide value to members. I will do anything I can to help any member of the community. So I created a video for one of the members showing them how to add their podcast to all the podcasting platforms. And when I did this, it was about 10. I saw the question about how to add the podcast to different platforms like Stitcher or Apple Podcasts. When I saw the message, I was awake for 10 minutes. And then I said, give me 2 hours and I'll create you a video. And that's exactly what I did. 30 minutes later, I had the video up and running, and they were able to use that video to post on every platform. Okay. Another way I provide value is I answer their questions. So if someone has a question about what equipment to use, I give them the most recommended equipment that I know of. I help them grow their podcast through tweeting about it, through listening to it. I help the community any way I can. If they have some question about podcasting, I will retweet it, anything. So, another thing I wanted to talk about growing a community, which I currently have, is the disadvantages. And one disadvantage I have for growing the community is that it's on Telegram. And people might be interested in joining the community, but they might not want to create a Telegram account. So that is one disadvantage that I've noticed. And another thing that I noticed is that you need a lot of members to have a lot of interaction in the community that's organic. So if you have very little members, it'll be hard to get interactions organically. So that's something to think about. Okay. Thank you for listening. just so you know, I have recorded the trailer and the first episode for the Open Podcast Community Podcast. It's a mouthful, I know, I'm sorry. And if you are interested in hosting your own episode, it can be whatever. It can be a solo episode, exactly like this one I have right now. You can interview someone, you can be interviewed. It could be a round table with your friends. If you're interested in hosting an episode, come join the community and contact me. Tell me you're interested, and we will set that up. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye. Are you still there? Alright, I have another joke. This joke is technically a joke I already did, but I scraped the episode so I can use it. Alright. Why didn't the teddy bear eat his cake? Because he was stuffed! Okay. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye.